Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask some questions about public service broadcasting, Dame Melanie, in a second, but just to follow up something the Chair was asking earlier on about the online harms and your interaction with government on that. Do you feel from that interaction which you described that there's an urgency in government to get on with this?
Yes, I do. I think government are really keen to get on with it from all the interactions I've had with them.
Okay. On public service broadcasting, you've been, as an organisation, having a consultation called Small Screen, Big Debate about the future of public service broadcasting. Do you think the current system's broken?
No, I don't think it's broken at all. I think we've seen over the last few months, we've seen the value of the public service broadcasters and the content they put on, and that's been valued by the viewer, and our research illustrates that. But what we've also seen during this crisis is that the streamers have done pretty well, the gamers have done pretty well, and so the competition has made further inroads into the traditional territory of the PSBs over the last couple of months. But what all our research shows is that the core offer of the public service broadcasting system of really high quality UK content, high quality, accurate news and current affairs, education services and so on, is actually valued. People recognise that it's there, they value it, and as long as it's relevant to them and their families, then it's something that they still want to watch.
And is it I suppose another way of phrasing the question, Damon, is it under threat, that valued regime?
Well, it's certainly under challenge. It's under challenge from the competition, and it's also under challenge because particularly younger audiences are increasingly turning to the internet, to gamers and streamers and so on, rather than to linear TV. And you can see that in all our data. So that is a big issue for the broadcasters. But at the same time, it can be done. You can see that younger audiences do come if the content is relevant to them. But it's increasingly difficult. So what our review will look at is some of those questions, and it will look at viability, it will look at what's valued, it will look at what works, what can be provided commercially, where might public subsidies still be needed, and so on. Right.
So I mean, and that's a key question, because you've agreed that it's something that's very valuable and valued by the British public. Mm-hmm. You haven't quite agreed that it's under threat. I think it is under threat. I think that's a civil service type word challenge. It's under threat because of the nature of the technological change that's going on and the integration of all media to the extent that broadcasting may not be the relevant word anymore for this regime, public service broadcasting. Maybe we should call it public service media into the future. And what are the sorts of things that will be necessary to stop this valued and valuable UK asset from withering on the vine in the next few years as a result of the challenge of technological change and the powerful nature of the tech companies and other largely foreign interests, that challenge that important part of our culture?
Well, I mean, you've touched on some important points there. So there is a question, I think, as to whether this is about institutions, broadcasters, or whether it is about the content that is produced that people value. So that is one of the questions. In the end, there will be questions about what the role is for public funding. Obviously, we have the licence fee at the moment, which is a form of public funding. One of the things that I think is important here, and we'll be doing some research particularly into commercial models that we will bring to bear in the work we're doing, is around what needs to be provided by through the public purse. So, for example, last year, Francis Cairncross's review into journalism was clear that local news is very hard to fund commercially anymore. So that's the sort of thinking that I think needs to be done. I think I would not say that this is a system under threat. I think that's putting it a bit too strongly, because we've got lots of options for the future. And the other thing I would just add is that I do agree that there is some competition from quite low value content in a number of respects, but we also see some great content increasingly being produced by the commercial broadcasters, whether it's from Sky, whether it's from some of the streamers. I don't know about you, but I'm increasingly looking at a whole range of sources and seeing some great content out there. So from the point of view of the viewer, that competition is in many ways a very good thing.
I agree with you about Sky. It's a multi-channel platform that behaves in a way, I think partly because of the gravitational pull of public service broadcasting in Britain, behaves in a way like a public service broadcaster with a lot of its output. It's part of the reason for that is that a number of people successfully headed off the attempt to take it over last year by Rupert Murdoch, which means it now has a 10-year guarantee of editorial independence for its Sky News service. And is not owned by the Murdoch empire, which a lot of people don't realise. But I would agree with you on that point. But do you think that public service broadcasting will survive unless there is, radical measures taken by government to protect it over the next decade? Or will it simply wither on the vine, which is what's the danger is?
Well, I hope it won't wither on the vine, and our work is designed to provide some options here. And we've talked about funding, but there are other issues such as prominence, which does have some value still, and also the wider regulatory regime in relation to competition.
And can I just probe you on that issue of prominence, actually, while you mention it, because you said it still has some value, but can public service broadcasting survive in a world where unless prominence is protected, even on voice-activated devices, even on the Sky Q box, even on all these ways that people are accessing content these days? Isn't the value in public service broadcasting that if we think it's important, is valuable, then it can't be locked away in a cupboard where people can't find it?
I completely agree with that, and in fact, Ofcom has, at the request of the government, given some ideas on how to extend the current prominence rules to things like smart TVs, because you're quite right, at the moment it's becoming less and less of value, and so we are going to need to take steps to protect it, and the broadcasters are very clear about that. I mean, the other important thing is advertising, and of course we would probably have been talking about the viability of advertising longer term, even without the coronavirus period, but we've seen that model become very challenged in the last few months. And there are some signs of a pickup, but clearly it's a vulnerability. And it's not just for our public service broadcasters, it's also for commercial radio and other important parts of our ecosystem.
Does that suggest, therefore, that one of the things that might be needed to protect the commercial public service broadcasters who rely on advertising revenue, more effective regulation of advertising online, because they will frequently complain they face a very unlevel playing field in relation to the regulation of advertising that they have to go through compared with what happens online?
Yes, I think that is one of the interesting questions, and the Competition and Markets Authority is doing a review, of course, of advertising online at the moment. It's another important question.
Okay, thank you, Chair.